Hey, Monday, October 7th. This is for both regular and advanced because today's story is one that all of my classes do because it is memorable, which we'll talk about here shortly. Stuff behind me, 9 weeks grades are updated. You also have 15 new B points for the new 9 weeks. Hat, coat, and glove drive continues to the end of the week. Tomorrow's dress-up spirit day thing is pink. And notebooks are due, which I'll talk about here in a moment. Blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah, you're also going to need to make sure you get this story, which I'll show you in a moment, called Lottery, which you can get on my website. Here is notebooky thing. This is due Friday. It's worth 125 points. Make sure you have all of the homework on there and all of the bell work on there, all the dates in the top left-hand corner and all the titles in the top middle spot. And then you can turn it in early, but if you make any mistakes, it costs you points. So if you're thinking that you might have made mistakes, wait until Friday. And I think that covers it from there. Those of you at home, if you are needing to download stories that you get to follow our joy, you can download there, or just wait till you come back. I'll be more than happy to give you a copy of it. You also got New Heroes Hall Pass today, which is green, and you're more than welcome to turn that in all the way through the end of... No, you can turn in the old one for 3 B points for each blank line, or hold on to it because it's good all the way to the end of the year. Now, for today's discussion. To understand our final story, one of the big parts of it is it's going to talk about traditions and understanding how traditions work. So my question to you is, what is a tradition?
Something you do.
When? Like right now?
No. On a specific date.
Works for me. Something that you do on a specific date. Amblin?
Something you do every year on a specific date.
Works for me. Every year on a specific date. Some traditions, I'm sure you guys know why we do them. Other traditions you might not be as familiar with. As examples, on 4th of July. What is the tradition that happens on 4th of July? Fireworks. It is not random that we do fireworks. There is a reason for that particular tradition. As opposed to like going around and high-fiving people on 4th of July, they chose fireworks because it represents something. What do the fireworks represent? Bombs and all explosions and gunfire. Why did we choose to represent guns and bombs and big boomy things?
Because wars.
Connecting to freedom. And here's the scary part, which war is it talking about? Slightly better than my other classes who yelled any number of wars, but the correct one. I heard anywhere from Vietnam War, which happened 40 years ago, all the way back to World War I, World War II, Civil War, Caveman Wars, and I'm like, now I think you're just making stuff up. And I'm like, Revolutionary War, and the fact that we had to fight off those crazy Brits, and so we got to fight for our freedom, that's why we do fireworks. That's the reason for that tradition. Other traditions you might not know as much of a reason behind, but it doesn't always matter. Like for Halloween, the one coming up. What is the tradition we do for Halloween?
Dress up.
2 parts, dressing in costumes, and then going around getting candy. I've heard, logically, there's like 5 different explanations for it. Anywhere from Day of the Dead, to the fact they were trying to scare away spirits, to the fact that it's a commercial holiday to sell candy, to just, why not? It sounds like... So, it comes down to, honestly... Even us as Americans, we don't know why we do these things on Halloween. Does that matter, though?
No.
Because what's the thing that you care about?
Candy!
In the end, you're like, who cares? Candy? We're good to go. And so in the end, that's all we care about is the candy. Same thing happens a wee bit for those of you who celebrate Christmas. We have similar ideas. Part of it, I'm sure you know, because of that Jesus dude, we give the presents because of the 3 wise men who hooked up Jesus with his presents, and there's an actual connection back to the actual holiday. But the idea of bringing shrubbery into our house, putting sparkles on it, and then praying to shrubbery does not connect back to Jesus. So the Christmas tree was not because he was born under a tree in someone's family room. Same thing with large fat man who throws presents at people. The people who went around and the wise men were not chunky fellows, so that's not connected there either. But for those of you who celebrate Christmas, Do you care about that?
No.
All we care about is the fact of, for some of you who are good of heart, is the giving part. For the rest of you who are human, it is the gimme, gimme, gimme part. But that's what we get to with traditions. The idea of traditions is it doesn't always matter why we do them, just the fact of the end result. The reason I'm telling you is that's going to play a big role in our story. They're going to talk about tradition throughout it. And at one point, you're like, Mr. Brovicast, but why? We're going to go, tradition. And you're going to go, oh, but why? We're going to have this conversation, make things better. Much like me ignoring Andre, and he's going to go, but what? And so then, the other part we get to, here, to help you out with our final story, it brings all of this stuff together. 1, suspense. What is suspense?
The stuff you do it that makes you go, ooh.
Like poor Andre wondering at what moment I might call on him, and he's like, is now the moment? No. Is now the moment? No. Is not. That's suspense. This story has a whole bunch, more so than even Black Cat, when you kept going, something bad's going to happen, something bad's happening, something, oh my God, when you got to that bad moment. This one's even more suspense-wise as we go through it. Of Story Mountain, what part of Story Mountain should suspense be in?
Climax.
Climax should be where it gets solved for you. It should be the rising action. You're going, Ermagerd, 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 and then climax, you're like, Ermagerd! And then that's when you finally find out why you've been scared the whole time. So it should be rising action the whole way through to get there. And then, almost finally, what's foreshadowing?
Just like the ending.
Here's the joy of foreshadowing in the story. Those of you who are smartical, you're going to start picking up on foreshadowing clues in here. It's a bit more subtle than some of our other stories. But those of you who pick up on the foreshadowing, it's going to start building into the suspense. Because you're going to start going, something feels wrong. And so you're going to start picking up on little clues as it goes along. Others of you will just be like, duppa, 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 and just enjoying it as it happens. But that's where the little foreshadowing sprinkles make things good. And the final thing before I get to talk to Andre, what is exposition?
Boring beginning stuff.
And here's a wee bit of the bad news for you. This story does have boring beginning stuff. If you look at the front page of it, a big chunk of that's boring beginning stuff. Good news is, we fly through it pretty quickly. The other good news is, it's not horrible boring beginning stuff. It's not like business class / math stuff boring. It's just like, compared to what's going to happen tomorrow, it qualifies as boring beginning stuff. But then everything gets much better from there. Andre.
The traditions don't have to be on a certain date or time. They can be like, if you catch a fish, you throw it back into the ocean.
Sure, you are correct. It can have connections along those lines. Yes.
How many ribs does a human have?
And Tig.
Kid has towel?
Right. So now, I heard you. Teacher has words. Also, with lottery, I guess since that's the title of our story, what is a lottery?
When you like
Gambling.
get a ticket for
Now,
money.
there you go.
Being lucky.
It's where you have a chance of being lucky and winning a thing. Do you always win money?
No, but you should.
Because we have a lottery I run in my class every week, except this week. And what is my lottery?
Oh, the tie game.
The tie game is your lottery on that one, where you put in your ticket and you're like, come on, big money, and you find out whether you win from there. Not every lottery necessarily involves winning money, but some do. One of my favorite book series involves a lottery, but does not involve winning money. It involves winning something else. So this one would be an example of a lottery. But here, they don't win money. They win the chance to kill other children, which for me is the best lottery of all. Now, for those of you who think like a loser, you're like, no, they win the chance to die. And I'm like, yeah, that's how losers think. Winners think you get to kill all those other kids. And so it's all depends how you look into it, but that's a lottery. Happy.
And we said we're not doing the tie game, but I am.
As you do.
I just made my guess.
I'm assuming you probably normally do. It might be similar to your previous guesses.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd check on that one. So now, as we get into lottery, don't get too excited. It's not quite that level of lottery. I just wanted to use an example. I know. That's like my favorite kind of lottery, but this one's a little different. As we get into it, you're going to figure out when's it taking place, where's it taking place, and what's it taking. No, I think that pretty much covers the main part. All right. The lottery. The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny, with the fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely, and the grass was richly green. The teacher hiccuped. Excuse me. The people of the village began to gather in the square between the post office and the bank around 10 o'clock. In some towns, there were so many people that the lottery took 2 days and had to be started on June 26th. But in this village, where there were only about 300 people, the whole lottery took less than 2 hours. So it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow the villagers to get home for noon dinner. They've already introduced some important things. One, what day is it?
June 27th.
Nicely done. June 27th, not June 26th. As they say, some days it starts earlier than that. What time of day is it? 10 in the morning. Where is it taking place?
A village.
In a village. Specifically where in the village?
Office in the bank.
Nicely done. Town square. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the town square, because you live here in Fishers, if you go to Noblesville, the town just north of us, they have a legit town square, which is like the square that's in the middle of town. They have things to go around it. That's a town square. Fishers has the circle where the library is and stuff like that, and all those apartment buildings. Not quite the same thing. And so it's more like a town circle, not even really that anymore. But this is, in Noblesville, they have a legit town square. So that's what they're referring to here. And how big is this town?
It's a village.
How big is this village? 300 people. To give you an idea of how big 300 people is, whichever lunch you're in, A, B, or C, we have about 330 kids in each of those lunches. So we have more kids in your lunch than they have in their entire town full of people. So in a rumble between your lunch and this town, I mean, you'd probably still get beat up because look at you. But you'd at least outnumber them, so that's something. All right. The children assembled first, of course. School was recently over for the summer, and the feeling of liberty sat uneasily on most of them. They tended to gather together quietly for a while before they broke into boisterous play. Their talk was still of the classroom and the teacher, of books and reprimands. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. Bobby and Harry Jones and Dickie Delacroix, the villagers pronounced his name Delacroix, eventually made a great pile of stones in one corner of the square, guarded it against the raids of the other boys. The girls stood aside, talking amongst themselves, looking over their shoulders at the boys. The very small children rolled in the dust or clung to the hands of their older brothers or sisters. Quick thing to pause here. What is it all the boys are doing? Collecting a whole big pile of rocks. Before we make fun of the boys for collecting rocks, what is it the girls are doing? Talking to each other and checking out the boys. So I'm not sure who we get to make fun of more, the boys who are playing with rocks or the girls who are like, look at all this. And so who are checking out the boys. So both of them have their issues. And the real small children are just doing what?
Rolling in the dirt.
Doing what small children do, just like making little dust piles. So
I do.
giving you an idea of how it's starting off, village all getting together, boys collecting rocks as boys do, girls checking out the boys as girls do, and the wee little children rolling in dirt as ducks do.
Wait, what if the boys are going to throw rocks at each other?
What? Boys would never do... Oh, yeah. Soon the men began to gather, surveying their own children, speaking of planting and rain and tractors and taxes. They stood together, away from the pile of stones in the corner, and their jokes were quiet, and they smiled rather than laughed. The women, wearing faded house dresses and sweaters, came shortly after their menfolk. They greeted one another and exchanged bits of gossip as they went to join their husbands. Soon, the women, standing by their husbands, began to call to their children, and the children came reluctantly, having to be called 4 or 5 times. Bobby Martin ducked under his mother's grasping hand and ran laughing back to the pile of stones. Boys. His father spoke up sharply, and Bobby came quickly and took his place between his father and his oldest brother. The lottery was conducted, as were the square dances, the teen club, and the Halloween program by Mr. Summers, who had time and energy to devote to civic activities. He was a round-faced, jovial man, and he ran the coal business, and people were sorry for him because he had no children, and his wife was a scold. Quick pause. Do you guys know what it means to scold somebody?
Yep.
It's like what you do to us.
Yes. So scolding is when you have to yell at a kid for talking out loud, or for many of you when you're at home and you don't clean your room and your parents are like, "What's wrong with you? You're a horrible child." That's scolding. So they refer to his wife as just being a scold. What kind of personality does she have?
Screaming.
Yeah. So just giving you an idea of what kind of personality she has. He, happy, friendly, outgoing. Her. When he arrived in the square, carrying the black wooden box, there was a murmur of conversation among the villagers, and he waved and called, "A little late today, folks." The postmaster, Mr. Graves, followed him, carrying a three-legged stool. The stool was put in the center of the square. Mr. Summers set the black box down on it. The villagers kept their distance, leaving a space between themselves and the stool, and when Mr. Summers said, "Some of you fellows want to give me a hand," there was a hesitation before two men, Mr. Martin and his oldest son, Baxter, came forward to hold the box steady on the stool while Mr. Summers stirred up the papers inside of it. Quick pause. We bring in three-legged stool, and then we bring in our lottery device, which is a
Box.
So this is the thing that's going to take main course throughout the whole story, black boxy thing. We're going to find out more about it, what's inside of it, how many points I'm going to take from the kid who keeps dropping the thing to make noise, all of those things as it goes forward from there. The original paraphernalia, which fancy word that just means stuff, for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box, now resting on the stool, had been put into use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in town, was born. Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. There was a story that the present box had been made of some pieces of the box that had preceded it, the one that had been constructed when the first people settled down to make a village here. Every year, after the lottery, Mr. Summers began talking again about a new box, but every year the subject was allowed to fade off without anything being done. The black box grew shabbier each year. By now, it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along one side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or stained. Quick pause again. How old is this box?
Super old.
Older than Old Man Warner, whose first name is Old Man, which probably made for a really weird childhood. But apparently this box predates him. And this box was made from pieces of the box that came from before it. So apparently they've been using this box and doing this lottery forever and ever and ever. Longer than Old Man Warner, who has the best first name ever. Mr. Martin and his oldest son Baxter held the black box securely on the stool until Mr. Summers had stirred the papers thoroughly with his hand. Because so much of the ritual had been forgotten or discarded, Mr. Summers had been successful in having slips of paper substituted for the chips of wood that had been used for generations. Chips of wood, Mr. Summers had argued, had been all very well when the village was tiny. But now that the population was more than 300 and likely to keep on growing, it was necessary to use something that would fit more easily into the black box. The night before the lottery, Mr. Summers and Mr. Graves made up the slips of paper and put them in the box. And it was then taken to the safe of Mr. Summers' coal company and locked up until Mr. Summers was ready to take it to the square the next morning. The rest of the year, the box was put away. Sometimes one place, sometimes another. It even spent 1 year in Mr. Graves' barn and another year underfoot in the post office, and sometimes it was set on a shelf in the Martin grocery and just left there. Quick pause again. What's inside black box?
Slips of paper.
Pieces of paper, but that's only because we're now updated. What did they used to use instead of paper? Chunks of wood. But they're like, oh my God, what are we, Neanderthals? Who does that? So we no longer use chips of wood. Now we use little pieces of paper because we're no longer Neanderthals, because the town has swollen. And how big is our town now? 300 people in one town. And so the fact that they're so big, we now have moved up to pieces of paper. There was a great deal of fussing to be done before Mr. Summers declared the lottery open. There were the lists to make up of heads of families, heads of households in each family, members of each household in each family. There was the proper swearing in of Mr. Summers by the postmaster as the official of the lottery. At one time, some people remember, there had been a speech of some sort performed by the official of the lottery. Hiccup again. A boring, tuneless chant that had been rattled off duly each year. Some people believe that the official of the lottery used to stand just so, and he said, or even sang it. Others believe that he was supposed to walk among the people, but years and years ago, this part of the ritual had been allowed to lapse. There had been also a ritual salute, which the official of the lottery had had to use in addressing each person who came up to draw from the box. But this also had changed with time, and till now it was felt necessary only for the official to speak to each person approaching. Mr. Summers was very good at all of this in his clean white shirt and blue jeans with one hand resting carelessly on the black box. He seemed very proper and important as he talked interminably to Mr. Graves and the Martins. One, that's the end of our exposition. Now we get to rising action. Two, as far as the lottery is concerned, how long have they been doing it?
Long time.
Works for me. Forever and ever and ever. Has it changed over time?
Yes.
What is the only thing they care about? The box is one part of it?
The stool?
And close. What we're going to find out is just the fact of doing the lottery. So we have the box and the fact that we do the lottery, and things have changed over the years, but they don't care. All they care about is the fact that the lottery happens. That's the important part. Casper?
I feel like the main character,
Uh-huh.
he was saying it, I bet you he's going to get picked.
Ooh.
Because, I mean, I like the story being,
We'll find out in a moment.
because, like, in the Hunger Games, like, obviously they're going to get picked because they're following his family.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah.
Wait, have we learned what they're doing the lottery for? Okay, making sure
That's
I'm not
the,
going crazy.
nope, they have not said anything about that yet. Happy. There is something that makes the story exciting, but I don't want to give away what it's going to be.
That's not death.
There's something that makes the story exciting.
That's not death.
I can't tell you that. Did he?
There is death.
Is this a story where we're never really going to find out why they...
Oh, well, kind of, maybe. I can't.
It's
Anyway,
very
You always have these...
just as it's a story that you are going to remember, I will tell you that. Much like you guys remember Landlady going much further into the future, this is long Landlady lines.
Because you made us drink poison.
Never give children poison. That would be wrong. Mrs. Hutchinson just as Mr. Summers finally left off talking and turned to the assembled villagers, Mrs. Hutchinson came hurriedly along the path to the square, her sweater thrown over her shoulders and slid into place in the back of the crowd. I clean forgot what day it was, she said to Mrs. Delacroix, who stood next to her, and they both laughed softly. I thought my old man was out back stacking wood, Mrs. Hutchinson went on. And then I looked out the window and the kids was gone. And then I remembered, it's the 27th. And I came a-running. She dried her hands on her apron. And Mrs. Delacroix said, you're in time, though. They're still just talking away up there. Mrs. Hutchinson craned her neck to see through the crowd and found her husband and children standing near the front. She tapped Mrs. Delacroix on the arm as a farewell, began to make her way through the crowd. The people separated good-humoredly to let her through. 2 or 3 people said in voices just loud enough to be heard across the crowd, here comes your Mrs. Hutchinson, and Bill, she made it after all. Mrs. Hutchinson reached her husband, and Mr. Summers, who'd been waiting, said cheerfully, I thought we were going to have to get on without you, Tessie. Mrs. Hutchinson said, grinning, you wouldn't have me leave my dishes in the sink now, would you, Joe? And soft laughter ran through the crowd as the people stirred back into position after Mrs. Hutchinson's arrival. Well now, Mr. Summers said soberly, guess we better get started, get this over with so we can go back to work. Is there anybody who ain't here? Dunbar, Dunbar, Dunbar! Mr. Summers consulted his list. Oh, quick pause. Not everyone in town gets to play the lottery. Only certain select individuals. So that's going to be part of our foreshadowing, is figuring out who gets to actually play it. Mr. Summers consulted his list. Clyde Dunbar. That's right, he's broke his leg, hasn't he? All right, who's drawing for him? Me, I guess, a woman said. Mr. Summers turned to look at her. Well, wife draws for her husband. Mr. Summers said, don't you have a grown boy to do it for you, Janie? Although Mr. Summers and everyone else in the village knew the answer perfectly well, it was the business of the official of the lottery to ask such questions formally. Mr. Summers waited with an expression of polite interest while Mrs. Dunbar answered. Horace is not but 16 yet, Mrs. Dunbar said regretfully. Guess I got a fill-in for the old man this year. All right, Mr. Summers said. He made a note on the list he was holding. Then he asked, is the Watson boy drawing this year? And there we stop. Tomorrow, nothing but rising action.
Please don't erase this. Yes. I'm working.
Take off. Enjoy.